Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the entertainment headquarters, and welcome to another very special Kaiju Connection segment that's dedicated to all things kaiju and giant monster in the world of cinema and television. And joining me today, we have two very special guests, both big kaiju fans in their own right. We have who I met all the way from G-Fest last year, Mr. Daniel Miller of Dan Filament. And of course, the next face that you see in front of us is somebody who's appeared on the channel a few times. He is, of course, Mr. Anthony Jordan of Anthony Jordan's Movies and Gaming. Welcome both of you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Same.
So, as we all know, we're both fans, or all of us are all fans of the giant monsters, the kaiju. But I always find there's certain films or certain kaiju that always get underlooked. And there's certain films, you know who the big names are if you're a fan of this genre. You've got your Godzilla, you've got your Gamera, you've got your Mothra, your Rodan, your Mecha Godzilla, and King Ghidorah. And the thing that connects them all together, they are all basically part of the first ever major cinematic shared universe. And there's other monsters and titans or kaiju, whatever you want to call them, out there that have already starred in their own movies, but were never given the same kind of respect, I would say, as those films. And that's what we had to talk about. We had to talk about one of these films that I really enjoy, but it doesn't really get talked about as much, similar to when we did last week, Varan, you and me, Daniel. We did, and we talked about Varan and how it was a film that doesn't really get looked at in the same light as others. I feel this one does as well, and I'm talking about the 1966 film, The War of the Gargantuas, which, for me is a really good movie. That's the Japanese poster, and this is the American poster. So I ask this question all the time. It's always the first question I ask when I do these types of things. I'll start with you, Daniel. Can you remember the very first time you ever seen War of the Gargantuans?
Yes, I can indeed. The first time I saw War of the Gargantuas was right after I watched Rodan in this 2-disc set from Classic Media, which was one of my purchases from my first trip to the States. And I remember being quite blown away by War of the Gargantuas because I watched the Japanese version first. I was really blown away by. So I know it's a sequel to another movie, which at that time I didn't have, Frankenstein Conquers the World. But I was really blown away by how the humanoid look of the kaiju, they were more expressive than, say, Godzilla, Varan, and Ishirō Rodan, because you could actually see the suit actor's eyes and facial features in the makeup amongst the costume, which I think made them, in some ways, that little bit more relatable than the than the lead kaiju.
Definitely. You, Anthony?
I don't remember how old I was, but I was a kid. It was just I think a summer day, and I was just bored. My mom called me upstairs, and there's a movie on I think you'd like, and it was War of the Gargantuas. I'd seen it, I enjoyed it, and that was the only time I seen it till I got this same set, which is sadly out of print, but this was such a great set. And it was a fun movie, and like Daniel said, just little things like the being able to see the kaiju more relatable. Haruo Nakajima, who's best known for Godzilla, actually said, other than the original Godzilla film, that this was his most satisfying role because he played the Green Gargantua and because his eyes were visible. He said it allowed him to do more than just physical acting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I first seen this film, and I actually didn't get to see this till much later. Because as you know, Daniel, us in the UK didn't really get much in the way of Godzilla or any kind of kaiju merchandise or films.
That's
I
right.
know, I do know, like, later in, like, the 90s, they did start releasing them on VHS, and you
That's
could
right.
get them in, like, the double packs, but they were all just the Godzilla movies. They didn't do anything outside of Godzilla, really. We
Yeah, that's
got,
true.
and then I think the only other thing that I noticed we got was the Heisei era Gamera trilogy. So I had to wait way later till it was available on the internet, and it might have been something like you said, no, Tubi or something like that. It was some way, shape, or form. I watched it online, and it was available free on one of these subscription channels that you didn't have to pay for. So since I've had the chance to watch that and the similar with Varan, I've really obviously fell in love with the film because it was one of the my mind. It was like one of them lost classics I was never going to get to see.
Yeah,
And, I finally got to see it. And like you've mentioned, this is a sequel to Frankenstein Conquers the World, which I think is also known as just Frankenstein versus Baragon.
that's right. That's
And
the original Japanese title for it.
yeah, so believe it or not, I still have not seen Frankenstein Conquers the World. It's it's one of those kaiju films or giant monster-esque 1950s or 1960 film I still haven't had the opportunity to see
Well,
because of
if
the
you
fact that it's not available in the UK.
well, if you get the chance to see it, then I'll just say you won't be disappointed. Not only is it the first time that we get introduced to Baragon, who would later appear in Destroy All Monsters, but it's also the movie that takes an iconic monster like Frankenstein, in this case Frankenstein's monster, but presents it with a unique uh, kaiju formula,
Mm-hmm.
which, of course, I mean, do you want spoilers or not? Because I can.
Well, you can tell us spoilers, but if you want, you can tell us the spoilers. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Frankenstein conquers the world. The storyline is in Nazi Germany, a scientist, if I remember correctly, he alters a human heart so it has an abnormal rhythm, a natural pacemaker, natural beating strength, and it gets shipped over to Japan until it reaches Hiroshima, where where a secret operation is going on to transplant the heart into a soldier. But then Hiroshima gets destroyed by a nuclear bomb. We then cut forward to present day 1960s. The heart, after being exposed to radiation, has started to grow its own body, and it's starting off a bit like a humanoid with the classical Frankenstein design. If you think back to Jack Pierce's Frankenstein, where it has uh, that forehead look, and with there's not so much stitching, but there is a ridge on there which resembles that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, while that's going on, a oil refinery gets attacked by an underground monster, which later reveals itself to be Baragon. Over the course of the film, Nick Adams, who stars in this movie, as well as would star in uh, Invasion of Astro Monster, he tries to, a sense, in a way, understand this Frankenstein, try and, in a sense, befriend him. All the while, one of the other co-stars, he's thinking, well, hold on, given that this is, we could use this to our advantage. We can make super soldiers to combat monsters like Baragon. but there's also a dark side to that as well, which he doesn't really acknowledge. But Nick Adams and the let's see. Yeah, the supporting actress acknowledges. Anyway, War of the Gargant. There is an alternate ending which I don't think was used in the theatrical cut of the Japanese version, where a giant octopus grabs Frankenstein's monster and pulls him under the water off the coast of Hokkaido, which then sets up War of the Gargantuas. Because in War of the Gargantuas, they're literally spawned from pieces of the Frankenstein creature.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
Gyro was underwater, so he's this greenish moss, so like weed and scale design. Whereas Sander, he's more mammalian in a sense, so he has more fur than hair in a sense.
Yeah, and he's more like the Earth Gargantuan because he lives in the Alps. He lives near the mountainsides.
That's right.
Yeah. So yeah. Obviously, with the Guardians, I was going to say, with War of the Gargantuans, which we'll talk a little bit about now. So I'll just do this quick little information that I've got here. The War of the Gargantuas is the War of the Gargantuan is a sequel film to Frankenstein versus Baragon. The film was a Japanese and American co-production. It was the third and final collaboration between Toho Co. Ltd. And Henry G. Saperstein. The film stars Russ Tablin. If you don't know that name, he's also in Twin Peaks, is the therapist. It also stars Kimi Mizumo, who is obviously a regular within the kaiju genre, Kenji Sahara with Yu Seklida and as Sanda, and Haru Nakajima as Gaira. In the film, scientists investigate the sudden appearance of two giant, hairy humanoid monsters that culminate in the battle in Tokyo. So, what I remember correctly, because is basically, like you've mentioned, the ending of of Frankenstein conquers the world, or Frankenstein versus Baragon. However you want to, spin it. Frankenstein dies in the alternative version. He's dragged underwater by a giant octopus, and this, to me, feels like that should have been the true ending because of how this film begins.
Yeah.
Because this film begins where you've got a storm and there's a boat within the ocean, and then a giant octopus attacks the boat and basically tries to feed on the fishermen or the people, the crew of the boat, when suddenly it stops its attack because then it gets attacked by this giant humanoid green furred monster within the ocean, which attacks the boat, and then kills the octopus, then it goes after the boat, and then you hear the stories from the survivor, and suddenly the two of the individuals in there start to believe this could be connected to Frankenstein, who was in the previous film, which for an opening for the film, I thought it had a very strong opening for a kaiju film.
Mm-hmm.
What was your thoughts on the initial beginnings of this film, Anthony? We'll start with Anthony.
Well, for one, nobody did back in the day. Nobody did storm sequences quite like Toho.
Mm-hmm.
Just
No,
with
it's
the
true.
water tank, the miniatures, and the wind machine, they knew how to just make it feel like a violent storm. And like you said, it's a strong opening. It starts with the octopus attack, then the green gargantua shows up, and starts picking off the survivors, although why he didn't stick with the bigger meal he already had. But we wouldn't have had a movie if that happened. And it builds up just enough. It gives you excitement right off the bat, and it gives you just enough mystery and suspense about what's really going on. So,
Mm-hmm.
no complaints.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Daniel, what's your thought on the opening?
Well, I have to say the same. It's for a kaiju movie, it's a terrific opening. The suspense is on point. The slow build up with the music, which I have to say is by Akira Ifukube, who has done such wonderful and fantastic compositions for all of the Toho kaiju movies that he worked on, the original Godzilla included. The build up to the music, it's really good. It's just as unsettling as watching the first arm of the octopus just slinking its way into the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this moment of silence when the tentacles just retract and there's nothing there other than the ambience. The man looks out the window in this flash of lightning, just get the shadow of the Gargantua fighting the octopus, and you have Ifukube's score in the soundtrack. Watching that the first time, I was like, holy shit, this is good. And again, like Anthony said, Toho knows how to do storm sequences with just a water tank and a miniature.
Yeah. The great thing I've noticed with the films, like we know with any film, sometimes what makes a scene is the score that accompanies the scene. And the great thing I noticed, obviously, with the original Toho movies is that they always had a great soundtrack. They always had like one score or one bit of music within that film that helped them scenes stand out for all the right reasons. Except when it's a lady singer and she's singing a horrendous song, which we'll get into later. But obviously, once this happens, the survivor of the boat talks to these scientists and people, and mentions how he was attacked by Frankenstein. The press get a hold of this, so because they get a hold of this, they want to try and get on top of it to stop stop a panic because of what happened previously in the previous film. So obviously they're trying to investigate everything. They then come up with the, like what you mentioned earlier, they kind of figure out that maybe the Frankenstein that's perished, that somehow some of his body parts or something have survived and they've grew into this new gargantuan.
Yeah.
And they also mention how they had like a smaller Frankenstein monster who they believed escaped and went into the mountains, and they just believed he went there and died. And they originally assumed that the green gargantuan is the same one in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So straight away, the plot has you interested because of all these little bits and pieces, especially with me not seeing the first film. And they're talking about Frankenstein's monster, and they're talking about how it's, a part of its cells or whatever have morphed into a new being, or like you say, there's a one hiding in the mountains, but you don't know that at the time. And the fact that you mentioned it right at the beginning, how the Nazis created an experiment with a giant heart that ended up growing its own body and it's become its own being. All fascinating stuff. This is what 1950s and 1960s sci-fi was all about, making these amazing, like unbelievable scientific and sci-fi plots.
Just the backstory could be its own movie.
Yeah.
Definitely. You could even had a film about the scientists doing different experiments and them going wrong and being killed by little creatures, and then that leads to the final scene where they have the heart that then gets exploited, and then the last scene could be like you just start to see the heart evolve, to start to form what would eventually become the Toho version of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So, would you like to carry on the plot, Daniel, and take over for a bit?
Sure. And one little thing I'd like to add, because I watched Gargantuas before I watched Frankenstein Conquers the World, and seeing the subtitles, I got the reference. I like to look at it in the same way as how James Cameron's Aliens informs you about Ridley Scott's Alien, even though you haven't seen it. It's the movie where, okay, it's a sequel, but it catches you up on the events of what happened last time, and it doesn't miss a beat while doing so. That's what I like about Gargantua's approach to the story in this with this Frankenstein monster. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now onto the plot. As the green Gargantua, Gyra keeps terrorizing fishermen and locals down by the coast, there are reports of a abominable snowman up in the Japanese mountains. Crew goes to investigate, and they find giant footprints in the snow, which now these are done by a matte painting, which I have to say looks wonderful. Especially because initially being a tokusatsu kaiju film, you'd expect every single effect to be in miniature, but when it's a matte painting, it's like, wow, this is different, and it's really, really good. This is wow, I'm digging this. Yeah. So of course, the green Gargantua emerges from the water at Haneda Airport, which is where the finale to Varan took place, also at Haneda Airport. And of course, the Gargantua is going around the airport causing a panic and eating people, which for a kaiju film, it's the last thing that you would expect, because it's not that often that a kaiju eating people happens. And it does happen in Gargantuas. And the way it's shown with intercut with the giant hand grabbing the actress, Nakajima in the monster in the Gyra costume holding a miniature, and then you have this really good special effect of Nakajima spitting out a cloth, which is actually in another scene a full size dress that belonged to the person that was eaten. And I'm looking at this like, oh shit, this just serious real quick. But then there's this moment when the sun comes out from behind the clouds, and then of course you have this lighting effect on Gyra, and you can see that he has this adverse reaction to natural light. So then he runs back into the ocean, and there is a moment that always makes me chuckle watching that scene, because there's a scene where he kicks a canister or a shipping container, and you just see it rolling and tumbling across the floor like it's literally a miniature, just as he jumps into the water tank that's built next to the set. And it's like, wow, this is amazing, this is impressive. But yeah, really good. And I also think, mentioning what Anthony said earlier, why it was a bit confusing why he attacked the ship rather than went after the octopus after he killed it. And this is something that's also common in other kaiju movies, is that kaiju have an adverse reaction to light. Like if you look at Godzilla and Godzilla Rates Again, it's the flares that lure Godzilla away to further shore. It's the fire at the plants that brings Godzilla back.
Beast from 20,000 Fathoms with the lighthouse.
Yes.
Yeah.
That as well.
I was going to just mention that, yeah. But like you say, it's very rare in these films you get a scene where you see a monster, like a kaiju, eating a human.
Yeah.
There's only been a couple of times where I've seen it. Like I do remember in Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, that scene where you've got the Meganulon and near the little subway, the sewage area that's getting work done on it, and the one flies out and attacks somebody, and you see the splatter of blood against the wall. Also, you've seen the odd scene, I think, with the Gaios as well from Gamera flying around picking up humans and all. Yeah, definitely.
Rodan.
Oh yeah,
Rodan.
I like Rodan because it's essentially them if it were done by a Japanese movie studio, and it's brilliant. The suspense, the horror, especially the soundtrack by Vakubi, it all works brilliantly along with Honda's direction.
Yeah, I was going to mention them because it gets referenced a lot when it comes to Rodan. Them's always been like had a good comparison to Rodan, but this is where the plot gets interesting because after Gaira kills or eats this person, they realise they need to do something about it. Because we can't have a giant humanoid monster eating people, and I think this is when they come up with ideas to try and lure Gaira away, I believe, or have I got my head of myself? It's so after he eats the woman at the airport, they have a meeting with the military with plans to kill the monster, and then they then discover, because of how Gaira ran away from the airport, that he has sensitivity to light. And so then they then plan on using devices to lure him, to try and to drive him away with bright lights. And they go on this attack and they start to lure him away, and he ends up in the mountain area. And when he gets to the mountain area, this is where we get first introduced to Sander.
Yeah.
Which, for me personally, I knew the film was called War of the Gargantuans, but it was great how they had built it up with just little hints that there's another one out there. And then suddenly, the main focus is on Gaira and being like the villainous one, eating people, attacking boats, attacking airports. And, he has that scene where I think he does attack the singer.
Yeah.
Which I think is prior to
hero.
Which makes him a hero because I was going tone deaf.
Words get stuck in my throat.
I just thought to myself, if she's not the best singer in the world, no disrespect to her, but the lyrics of the song, the actual lyrics of that song, who give the green light?
Yeah, if you haven't seen this movie, it's the perfect storm of abysmal lyrics with a singer that can't carry a tune in a bucket.
And it's the only time you actually want a villainous monster to kill a human.
Yeah. In the Simpsons comic, they did a parody of War of the Gargantuas, and the scene where they're having the punch up in the streets, you'd actually have the lyrics of the song in Gaira's speech bubbles.
That could only happen in The Simpsons.
Yep.
That could only trust them to like that song.
Yeah.
Trust them to like this song, the horrendous song that's in the film. But as you know, they end up going to the mountains and lure him to the mountains after this incident. And this is the great thing, is there's had all this build up of them potentially being another one out there. And we're finally introduced to Sander.
And it's been kind of a slow burn up to this point.
Yeah. A slow burn, but it was worth worth the burn. But for those that don't know, I haven't seen it. This is Sander. So he is the good kaiju, and then this is Gaira. So the great thing I loved about when you're first introduced to them, not only do they have different colours, it's the actual look of them.
Yeah.
Like if you look at Gaira, he looks more docile. He looks more, friendly. He doesn't look like,
It looks.
dangerous. Where
Yeah.
Gaira, they kind of give him more like a hideous, like a true monster look.
Yeah.
Like they've tried. That's a great thing I like. They tried to, differentiate the two. So
Yeah.
you knew who was the villain. You knew who was the hero monster.
If,
And that's what I
if
liked
they
about
made
it.
if they made this today, and I'm not saying just in general with modern movie making, they probably would have looked the same with just different colors.
Yeah.
Definitely. They wouldn't have done anything different. And I've noticed, like with a lot of fan art, when it comes to Gaira, they give him larger teeth. They give him larger bottom teeth, but I don't see it yet in the film.
No.
Like if you go to like ID, is it IDW who do the comic that have the right to the comics?
Yeah.
So they do
IDW
these.
publisher.
So I have these, which is the entire, Godzilla Complete Rulers of the World Part 2 and Part 1. And the art in these books is fantastic if no one's ever read them. But there is somewhere in there is a scene of them fighting. And when you see the look of Sander, oh, there we go. There's Sander. I don't know if you can see him. Where's they see how he's got large bottom teeth?
Yeah.
So I've noticed a lot of fan art of Sander, not Sander, of Gaira. They pretty much keep Sander the same with the pleasant docile face, but then they always give. If you look at that bottom photo there, if you look at this Gaira there and Sander, Gaira has a pleasant look on his face, like a normal human. But then, as you can see, when it comes to Gaira, they give him like a more monstrous look.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
So,
the teeth are a bit more like tusks.
yeah,
Instead of teeth, are they
so
just sort of like protruding out of the gums?
definitely. And even though that he's not completely like that within, obviously, these films, just like I say, even on this photo, he looks very pleasant, looks more friendly, where he looks more like a monster ready to attack.
He still does have slightly bigger teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the crunch on humans and whatever he gets his teeth into.
I also
But
like how they've made his teeth look more crooked and more bent outwards as opposed to Sander.
yeah, because they've obviously done that deliberately to make them look. They make who is, I guess, the villainous monster and who is the hero monster, or the one we're meant to root for.
Mm.
But
You can tell those teeth are clearly for shredding flesh.
definitely. So, Anthony, would you like to carry on where we're left off with the plot?
We're getting on to the military attack, right?
Yes.
Okay, we get to the mountain area. We have a scene where I believe it's the brown one. He saves the scientist's partner.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the military attack Gyra, and they use the masers, which are those laser cannons, and they look like they're getting the upper hand on him when he gets saved by his brother, and it's just this big thing that now we have two of them to deal with, and they disappear. The brother, the brown one, Gyra, he helps him out and takes him to where his lair is, and we come to my favorite performance in the movie where he does his thing and comes back, and he looks around, and Gyra's just laying there, but he sees like all this evidence that he's been eating people, and it's just all done with just looks in the eyes that it's like the Sanda's looking at Gyra, and Gyra's like, you could just tell it's like, oh, you got a problem with this? Are we gonna fight now? And he goes, and it's like pretty much, and he just grabs the tree, and from here on out, the movie just lives up to its name because it is the War of the Gargantuas, and they just beat the snot out of each other at every chance. And I can't state, if you haven't seen this movie, I can't understate how good this performance is. Not just the physical performance, but again, the fact that the suit actor's eyes are available. Like Nakajima said, this was his second most satisfying role because of that. And like, you can see the gears turning in Gyra's head as he realizes, okay, my brother doesn't approve of this, and this is gonna be a problem. It's just a great run of the story. And like I said, it was a slow burn up to a certain point, but just it goes full steam from here on out.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to what you say with the emotion and being able to see the change of look on, Gyra's face, and obviously Sanda, seeing what's going on, and he's just lying there, like having a nap after basically slaughtering a bunch of, tourists or whatever, and he's looking around and he can see the carnage, and he's just devastated, and he just comes around with, I guess, sadness and also rage and anger. Now, if we look at the modern film that's just come out, Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, if you look at the motion and how the CGI Kong's face in emotion, I could just imagine if they did a modern version of this, the Gargantuas, and they had this scene, how amazing it could have been with CGI, seeing the sheer disappointment and sadness, and then anger and rage in Gyra's eyes and face, and then seeing that this, I guess, the disappointment in Sanders because he doesn't approve of what he does to survive. And I think it would be amazing if they did a modern remake of this.
Well, we kind of did see what a scene like that could be like in Godzilla X Kong when he gets to Scar King's lair, and you see that moment of, I found more of my people, and then when he realizes the Scar King's there and he's this slave driver, you see that rage behind Kong's face.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's at this point that they have the first mini little battle. But obviously Gyra, he's not much of a fighter. Well, Gyra's the green one. I always get the mix. Is Gyra the green one?
Yeah.
Sanda's the brown one.
Yeah, I get these mixed up. So Sanda's not much of a fighter because he's lived in the mountains. He's probably survived off the trees and whatever he eats there. Where obviously Gyra lives off people and hunts in the ocean. So has more of aggressive nature and attitude. So this is the bit where they have their first, like, I guess, a mini fight. The first mini fight in the mountain area. But unfortunately, obviously, Sanda doesn't board too well and injures his leg. And just like you, though, Daniel, when you said that there's that scene at the airport where Gyra runs and he kicks he kicks the that
The container.
the shipment container, and it bounces around the floor. There's that scene when he leaves the mountain area, Gaira, and he's heading towards, and you see people like in the village, and they look up, they can hear the monster, they can see the monster, they're running away in fear, and he does like an Olympic sprint through the buildings.
Yeah.
and you just see the little miniatures, like the roofs popping off when he's running through them.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that scene, because
Yeah.
it's like they're all screaming, running away, and he's just basically running through their homes and buildings, and he just didn't give a shit.
No.
So obviously the military are trying to find a way to kill the monsters, and I think this is when they're back in the main city, and it's night time, and Gaira's arrived, and the scientist and his girlfriend's there, and this is where basically Gaira starts to hunt the female, the scientist, and he just about grabs her and kills her until Sander rocks up. And this is where the biggest brawl between the two happen, and it's just an all-out war.
Yeah. It's literally a boxing match in the streets of Tokyo.
Both Nakajima and I keep forgetting the actor's name, but the one who played the brown Gargantua, they both knew judo, so that knowledge was able to just make this fight even more physical.
Yeah.
There's one particular scene where I think Sander's trying to, communicate with Gaira, and is trying to calm him down and try to see that I don't want to fight you anymore. And you see Gaira grab Sander, and he flips him, and you see like him go flying over around on his back. And you could tell that was like a proper, like you mentioned, Anthony, karate or jiu-jitsu move. You could just tell, and he lands on a building and smashes through the building. I just thought that was just awesome.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they're using the real life skills as martial artists or jiu-jitsu trainers, and they're using it on the miniatures, and they're going through buildings using these techniques, and it just adds to the story in the scenes and the explosions and the graphics and the whole, weight of what's happening within the middle of Tokyo.
Yeah. I also want to add that the soundtrack in this part of the fight is really a really good balance of the action, of like the monster fighting each other, literally throwing themselves into buildings. But there's also that sad motif which you hear, which would later be reused in Terror of Mechagodzilla for Katsura's theme. You hear that little somber piece as Sander is trying to like say, "Look, no more. Let's stop this, please." And then Gaira is just unrelenting, and Sander eventually he caves in, and he literally goes after Gaira in the fight, ultimately getting the upper hand before they take the fight into the Bay Area.
Into the Bay. Yeah. I think Sander's like, right, he's not going to listen to this. There's no reasoning in with Gaira. If he wants a fight, if he wants a war, we'll just fight till the death. And that's basically what he does. And there's Gaira. So this is obviously, there's Gaira at the airport where he ate that lady. And actually, if you look at his teeth, he does have two longer tusk-like bottom teeth sticking out. But like I mentioned, they've tried to make him look more like a vicious monster, where they've made Sander look like this, peaceful creature. But yeah, this is where they end up going to the bay, into the ocean, and this is the only bit that I wish they showed more. Like, they go to the ocean and they're fighting, and they talk about them fighting in the ocean and disappearing in the ocean. And then it goes back to the scientists and the military, and they're just talking about, or they've disappeared. They could be missing in the ocean somewhere. And this is when, obviously, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's an underwater volcano that erupts. And when the volcano erupts, you can see Sanda and you can see Gaira fighting, and then it's like disappears. They just disappear, and then it basically ends up with a question mark: are they dead or are they not? Because they do try and get a scientific reading to see if they're still there, if any of them survive, but it's too hot and they can't pick up any signal, so it does leave it open for them to come back.
Yeah, I have to say that the effects in that scene are brilliant. How they keep fighting, but of course you have the foam, the lighting, and the water effects, creating that frothing as they're literally sinking into the volcano. And you have Iwakubi's score in the soundtrack, which instead of this bombastic or dramatic fight sequence, it's almost like the score in the original Godzilla when Serizawa has used the oxygen destroyer. You have this bleak, depressing, melancholic music underscoring the background, and it fits perfectly.
I did enjoy the scene. I was kind of disappointed though that like you didn't really get it leaves it on a question mark. Like, you don't know if Sanda survived or if Gaira survived. They leave it on a question mark, and they haven't done a sequel where, did any of them survive? Like, I was hoping at least one of them would have popped up in Destroy All Monsters.
But they could easily just do a direct sequel to it today.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sure it's either, I don't know which one of the Millennium movie films it is, but there's a scene where the Mia, who is played by the actress who plays the
Against Mechagodzilla.
Is it against Mechagodzilla? Yeah,
Yeah.
I knew it was one of them. Where the same actress who plays like the Mia, who's about to hand over her, job as the Mia of Tokyo, she
Prime
does.
Minister.
Yeah, the Prime Minister. Sorry, we call them Mias over here in the UK.
Yeah.
So when we refer to your guy's Prime Minister as a Prime Minister, you're actually referring to him as a mayor?
Well,
Yeah.
sometimes I do because the shit.
Yeah.
They're not the shit.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I don't like to call them the Prime Minister if they don't do a good job.
Nope.
So, but anyway, the Prime Minister, there's that scene where she's talking about all these kaiju attacks from the past, and they do show, I think they show Gaira. So that could have been referred to, that Godzilla against Mechagodzilla is a direct sequel to the events that happened in this. They're all connected.
And we see Gaira in the intro to Final Wars.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'll have to look out. You see, it's when you hear all these things and you've got to go back to see it. When you cannot remember, or you get told something, I can't remember seeing that. Then you've got to go back and watch it to make sure you see it for yourself.
Yeah.
But I did the ending, like I say, is a good ending. But I think I think the ending of Rodan was a bit more dramatic.
Yeah.
When you see the two Rodans dying, or what you believe both have died, I found that a bit more crushing than this. But it was still a satisfying ending, nevertheless. So, in all, what's your thought on this movie? We'll start with Anthony Jordan. In total, what's your overall, thought on War of the Gargantuans?
A great underrated classic in the movie. When you think about it, it's really a tragedy. You have these two creatures that are the only members of their species, and they're destined to fight each other to the death. And fitting, we mentioned underrated when we have also the for my money, the most underrated film composer in history, doing
Agreed.
the soundtrack to this. And keep in mind, when we're bragging about his soundtrack, I'm not dogging John Williams, but John Williams could have a year or more to make a soundtrack for a film. Akira Ikefube, they're like, we need you to make this soundtrack for a film. And, oh, can you get it done in a week? Can you get it done in 2 weeks? So not only did he have to write music that can sell these giant monsters and somehow make them feel more powerful, but he just had days to compose it. So I can just imagine all the late night, all night sessions he had to do. The miniatures were great. The suit actors, their performances just physically and emotionally were great. You can just, again, you can see the sorrow and rage they have over fighting each other.
Yeah.
It's
Especially Sander. I
Yeah.
think Sander for me is like this film's Kong, where he basically he's torn. You know, he wants a family, basically like what Kong does. He wants like he finally has somebody else in his life,
you know
but
now
then
that
he has to. He then has to basically fight against him to like because he doesn't like what he's doing.
now that you mention it, I think Monster vs. Kong did borrow a lot from Sonda.
Definitely, that 100% agree. Like the emotional side, obviously, Kong's always been more of a sympathetic character, but
Yeah.
you can definitely see the influences for some of his story arc from Sander 100%. And even if you look at the world of the Hollow Earth, it looks like the mountain areas where Sander would live. Some parts of it, if they ever did a MonsterVerse version of the Gargantuas, I could definitely see them being a part of the Hollow Earth.
And there's a clip, I shared it with you, but I would suggest people looking it up. There's a 2012 Oscar interview with Brad Pitt, and it's obviously been a while since he's seen the movie. He didn't describe the plot the best, but you can also tell that this was clearly an influential movie to him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Like, I would like to see Brad Pitt a part of the MonsterVerse, and I think if they ever brought the Gargantuans into it, he would definitely want to be a part of it.
Give him the scientist role.
Yeah. This is something this is something I wanted to ask you guys. Do you think that they actually should have the Gargantuas be canon in the MonsterVerse?
Yeah.
Well, I think anything Toho owns could be canon in the MonsterVerse, to be fair. So any monster that they've created, any licensings that they own, anything that's under them could potentially be canon within the MonsterVerse. Like, you know, we're all headed into a new film. We do know it's meant to be Godzilla focused. So with it being Godzilla focused, I can't imagine they would bring in the Gargantuas for them to fight Godzilla. But I could see them, if they ever did, you know, if there is an end game and they do decide to end, you know, the MonsterVerse on a high and they want like a destroy all monsters type film, that would be the perfect time to bring the Gargantuas back.
Right. And when you watched Godzilla vs. Kong, I'm trying to remember his name, the nerd character who was in charge of the Titan podcast, he mentioned in a line of dialogue a screen user whose name included Gargantua in his screen name, commenting on one of his blogs, and I was sitting there listening like, Gargantua, wow.
Yeah, the thing is, people might not think, but I do believe that when it comes to the creators of the MonsterVerse films, I definitely think they do look a lot into the Toho library. There's a lot of influences. There's a lot of, Easter eggs, like even way back when they did Godzilla 2014. I think
Yeah.
you mentioned this, Anthony, that there was one scene where you had the poster on the wall and it looked like Mothra. Little did we know, years down the line, that Mothra would actually eventually be introduced. So, and there's obviously even you didn't even know it back then, but it's now come to light that if you look very closely at the Awi tribe on the island, there's they've got little like headbands on, or they've got necklaces on, or they've got like brooches on, and it's the Mothra symbol.
Yeah.
So, whether that was intentional, knowing that they were bringing her in, or they just put it down as an Easter egg, it's these little details that stand out that fans, will always remember, and it'll always build hope that one day their favourite monster could enter the Monsterverse. And speaking of like regeneration, like how Frankenstein in this came into the world, and like how Ghidorah could regenerate, they could always bring in the Gargantuas as some sort of Ghidorah DNA/human hybrid. Like they use, they could always do something where they find Ghidorah DNA and they use it on a human heart and it builds a Gargantua. You don't know, there's many possibilities how you can bring in these creatures or any form of Toho property into the Monsterverse. But, that's an idea that could potentially come ahead.
So even non-Toho, like, you could do something where they're like experimenting with Ghidorah cells, and we got Reptilicus.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But it all depends on the partnership, though, with Toho. If Toho are willing to allow other non-Toho licensed monsters into the Monsterverse, then it'll happen. Obviously, Kong's the only one that they've allowed, and that's because they've already had a partnership with them. But they've licensed Kong, but if you notice, they can't call him King Kong. They just have to call him Kong. But technically, without saying it, he became King Kong at the end of Godzilla X Kong. He's now got his tribe. He's now got his own people. So, and I don't know if it's because the family who own the King Kong novel and book, who have the rights to it. I think what happened is Universal had the rights to the film license of the Kong name, the King Kong name. And I think originally Kong Skull Island was actually going to be created by Universal. And when Godzilla 2014 was a success, what happened is, I think they had negotiated to be able to use Kong for the Monsterverse, and then transferred the film over to Warner Brothers and Legendary. And they were allowed to do that, but they weren't allowed to keep the King Kong name, just Kong, because Universal, I think, still are able to use King Kong. And
I think to differentiate in case they do their own separate Kong movie.
Yes, but then I think what's happened is, though, I think Universal, I think the licensing contract expired, and then Disney picked up the license to use King Kong, and now they're doing their own King Kong series. Because there were loads of rumors that they were going to potentially do a King Kong series with Universal, but that fell through. And now Disney announced that they're doing their own King Kong series. So clearly they've seen the success of the Monsterverse and they want a piece of the kaiju action. But overall, now keep on fucking saying the Guardians. It's because I've seen the Guardians of the Galaxy that many times. The War of the Gargantuans, for me, like I say, just like Varan, is one of them films that if you haven't seen it and you're a kaiju fan, you need to see it. It's definitely a great film. And I'll be truly honest, I did like this a little bit more than Varan. because I liked the fact you had two combatant titans, and I loved the story, and I loved how they humanized, and you could tell which kaiju was the villain and which was the human. So Daniel, if you had to rate War of the Gargantuans, and what are your final thoughts on War of the Gargantuans?
War of the Gargantuas. I'd have to rate this pretty high, really, both as its own movie and as a sequel to a pre-existing film. It does, it humanizes a kaiju in a way that you wouldn't expect it to, and when it comes to the final battle, the conflict at the end, you can't help but actually feel sorry for both Sander and Gyra, even though Gyra has done much worse than Sander in comparison. But yeah, it's great monster designs, great monster makeup, great miniatures, especially the scenes where they introduce the maser cannons with the military march, which would later be reused throughout the Heisei era movies.
There's some backstage shots of the making of the movie.
Yeah, that's Ishirō Honda guiding Nakajima on how Gyro would act in terms of movement.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's also one thing I have to say. Honda's direction in this movie, just like it was on Godzilla, on Rodan, and on the original Frankenstein, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And if anyone has the chance to, I would highly recommend that you watch or either the American version or the Japanese cut of the film. And one thing I didn't find out until last year actually was the actor who played the lead scientist in War of the Gargantuas was also in the first film adaptation of Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House. See him there?
Oh, cool! Yes, and he's also in, like I mentioned before, he's in Twin Peaks.
Yeah,
he plays a therapist in Twin Peaks. So he's
I need to check that show out.
I do recommend it. They did the original, then they brought it back a few years ago.
Yeah.
But I would definitely recommend Twin Peaks. And what would you rate it then, Daniel, out of 10?
Out of 10, I would give it a solid 9. Solid 9. I'm not quite sure what it is that holds it back from being a 10. I'd say that it would just be the minor things in Gargantuas. I mean, there are some moments with the human characters that are genuinely heartwarming, like the group of teenagers walking through the mountain pass, singing carefree. And of course, there's the words get stuck in my throat performance, which I did like the build up in that scene when the lights go off, but it's just the music track playing, and you just get this sense that something is coming, something terrible is going to happen, but you're held in suspense because the performance.
Either something terrible is going to happen, or can you just shut her the fuck up?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Something terrible was happening.
Just let her get eaten, please. So your 9 out of 10. So Anthony, your final thoughts, and what would you rate it?
Well, for final thoughts, since we were bringing up people like Honda and Akira Ikefube, we also have to bring up, because we've bragged about the creature design, Eiji Tsuburaya, who was the monster maker of Toho, who designed and made all these classic monsters. But my final thoughts, just one of Toho's best movies of the 60s. And keep in mind, 66, this came out around the same, so this same year as Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. And as much as we love Godzilla, like, that film's quality doesn't even compare to this one.
I would agree. I would agree.
Definitely, I'm not a fan of Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. And actually, since you brought that up, Godzilla versus the Sea Monster should have been a Kong film.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
And then
Godzilla versus Kong was supposed to be Frankenstein originally.
yes. So
Yeah.
it's funny how it's all interconnected in a way. Like that scene where Godzilla's in the cave and they wake him up with electricity in the sea monster. That really is how we woke up Kong, because Kong has electrical hands.
But
So it
I was
makes
gonna
sense.
give it a so I was gonna give it an 8.5, but after this, I'm gonna go with a 9.
Mm-hmm. One thing since we've mentioned, isn't it curious, is if they had done Kong in the sea monster and then they done they did the Gorgon. Wouldn't it have been funny if they did a Kong versus Gargantua film afterwards? It would have been great if all of this was a build up to a clash with the Gargantuas in Kong, because I think that would be a fight that would have sold at the box office. I definitely think if they hadn't lost the license or give up with the Kong, character, or if they were still willing to be able to use the character, it would have been great to see how that turned out. But as for me, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 as well. And why it loses a point for me is, obviously we've talked about the horrendous singing in that song with the worst lyrics of mankind. But for me, the only thing that I faulted this is the ending for me wasn't as strong. You have that very strong ending in, Godzilla 1954. I thought the ending and the demise of the Rodans was more, more impactful. And I was kind of disappointed. Like, if it was up to me, I would have loved to see Sander survive and you see him swimming off into
And
the ocean.
there's no build up to the ending either. It just
Yeah,
sort of stops.
yeah, it just goes flat. It's a very flat ending. It was like, I think the whole film's at a nice pace, even the build up to the reveal of Sander, but then it seems slightly rushed by film's end, and I think that's why it loses that extra point for
It's an
me.
abrupt ending that just happens right out of nowhere. And it just immediately, it's like, okay, here's a volcano coming at you at 100 miles an hour. And it's like, what?
Definitely. But in all, like I say, I didn't get to see this till the internet happened and I was able to find it online to watch. But since I've been able to find it, it is a Toho film that, since I've discovered it and been able to finally watch, it's slowly become one of my favourites. Despite how I feel about the ending, I love the characterizations of the two monsters. I love how you can tell who's who. The story overall is a great story, and I love like the emotional battle with Sander, how he's finally found another one of his kind, but he doesn't enjoy what he does or how he survives. And then you've got Gaira, who to us humans comes across as a villain and a monster and a threat, but he's just going with his nature. He's basically just, that is his nature. He's an aggressive hunter type monster creature. So he's just going with his nature of who he is. And that's a great thing I love about this, is that you have these two different characters who are both, from the same species, but two different personalities and two different ways of looking at things. And it's like, if you think about it, if you've got any pets, you don't ever have two dogs the same or two cats the same or whatever. They've all got their own personality, and that's what makes them unique and different and stand out. So, in all, I would say definitely 9 out of 10 for me. But this has been a blast, gentlemen, as always. I love doing these little reviews, especially the retro type reviews where I can go back and look at films with a fond memory from my childhood like this.
But before we go, I do want to share this because I shared with you the little thing on the back. Peter Benchley's The Beast, which was a TV movie based on a book of his about a giant squid. Somehow on the back, when they put the scenes, they put a screenshot of the octopus attack from War of the Gargantuas. I don't know how that happened and how it got past all the whatever they have to do, but I always just found this hilarious.
That is hilarious. And since before we go, I'm going to do one fun fact that I've just read about. Like, we've talked about the reach of this movie. You've mentioned it, Anthony, how you sent me that clip with Brad Pitt talking about this movie. Another person who was influenced by the War of the Gargantuas was Quentin Tarantino. So the film, this is what Quentin Tarantino was inspired for. The film inspired part of Quentin Tarantino's 2004 film Kill Bill Volume 2, such as a miniature shot of Tokyo made specifically from the film and fight scene between Uma Thurman and Daryl Hannah, which dubbed the War of the Blonde Gargantuas. Tarantino had screened the film for Hannah, and Hannah's character used the word gargantuan several times. So, you know what that means, don't you? I'm going to have to go back and watch Kill Bill 1 and 2 because I want to see this, and I'm going to gag when I see it. Obviously, also in 2011, manga artist Hajime Iyasama cited the film's titular monsters and is an inspiration for the Titans in his best-selling manga series Attack on Titan, which I think out of all of the influences this film has had, out of all of the films that it has, or any property away from the film itself it's inspired, you can 110% see it within Attack on Titan, especially the Beast Titan.
That's
I don't
just
know if you've
hit me
ever
right
seen
now. This whole time I thought it was like, okay, it's a bit like King Kong, but then just now you mentioned Garden, it's like, oh shit, now I see it.
If you go back and watch Attack on Titan, all of the Titans remind me of the Frankenstein from Toho. They all, like the humanoid Titans, remind me of, their version of Frankenstein from Conquers the World, or Frankenstein versus Baragon. But then, and then there is. Yeah, and then there is another Titan who is like a main antagonist Titan called the Beast Titan. Now, if you look at the look of the Beast Titan, it looks like a mixture of Gyra and Sander. And for me, that is the biggest compliment you could give this film. That the creator of a very successful manga series was inspired by a Toho kaiju film. And it's one of the, for me, it's one of the most well-known kaiju-esque manga series that you could imagine out there right now.
Yeah, I can even see it in the live action props that they did for the live action Attack on Titan.
Definitely. So there you go. War of the Gargantuans has a farther reach than we even knew or thought of way years later in 2011, and with a manga series which now has become a successful anime series, and as well as 2 live action films. And if Quentin Tarantino's talking about it, Brad Pitt's talking about it, then clearly this film has a legacy beyond anything we ever thought it would.
Yeah.
So with that said, it's been a pleasure, gentlemen, as always. Dan, what you got coming up? Because you're going to be starting doing your creative writing, aren't you? Your horror stories coming up soon.
Yep. I'm halfway through writing the first episode, just the actual production. I need to get started soon, but I do hope on making it a good pilot.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks. I also hope that if it's well enough, I can do a lot more. So I've got 2 or 3 more already lined up. They just need to be written out, and then audio recorded and filmed around with or whatnot.
Well, I hope it goes well, and I wish you all the success in the world with it. I really do. Anthony Jordan, what's coming up with you and your channel?
Well, I started gearing up in full gear for Montober and October. I just watched the Nightmare on Elm Street remake so I can review it, and I got to do the editing for it. So even though it wasn't a good movie, I'm not gonna lie, I've had fun recording the review for it, and I'm sure I'm gonna have fun with the editing. And after that, I'm gonna do the Evil Dead films and end the month of October with my review of Halloween H2O. So just gearing up for the October right now.
That's good. And like I say, anyone that watches our reviews, please check out both these guys' channels. There'll be links to them in the bottom of this description of this review. But it's been fun as always. So thank you to you, Daniel. Thank you to you, Anthony. And as we always say, if you love your kaijus, keep the kaiju love alive, because they're taking over the world right now thanks to the Monsterverse, thanks to Ultraman's had a bit of a boost, thanks to the American anime film Gamera's had a massive comeback with the animated series, and I've got a funny feeling there's more to come in the future. So keep loving your kaiju and keep the kaiju love alive. This has been the Entertainment Headquarters. This has been Kaiju Connections, and we'll catch us all at the next one.